Hey everybody, how you doing? Chris Vaccaro here. Another episode of Sachem Conversation, and I'm joined by John Cassese, a Sachem alum, former Sachem teacher, administrator, someone who cares deeply about a place that helped make him who he was as an educator and as a person. And this is an oral history project meant to talk to the people who lived history, made history, and record that for the people that come after us to make sure that we figure out where this community should be based on where it's been. And I really feel strongly about it. Its foundation is in the people who helped make it what it was. It helped make Sachem a name. It wasn't something before 1955, but in those last 60 plus years, it became something. And I want to make sure that we harness what that means. And so these conversations help that. And Dr. Cassese, is the first person that's really, I've been doing coaches and athletes, and now we're talking education, administration. We're talking the broader scope and spectrum. Yes, a lot of the coaches are teachers, but you're a member of the Sachem Hall of Honor for a lifetime of service, educating the students of this community that once served you as a student as well. So I love it. Thank you for being here. Thank you for joining me. I'm excited to talk to you about your life and career.
That's my pleasure, Chris. Thanks for doing all of this hard work and keeping all of those, the history alive and making it real for people. Just can never lose that. So thank you.
Yeah, my pleasure. We'll go back to the beginning, growing up here. Into what town did you grow up in? When did your family come out here? What was it like as a young kid in this place where, when you were early on, Sachem wasn't necessarily a thing, but by 1955 it was. So what was that like in those formative years for you?
Yeah, actually, formative is the right word. I grew up in Brooklyn, actually, Bensonhurst, Brooklyn. We moved here. We came out in summers like so many people did. We finally did move here. And when we did, I went to a middle school for 8th grade in Port Jefferson, which really was not a good experience at all. In that school was 14 miles away from my home. So, you're having a school experience and then coming home to a very different experience. And at that time, really far less populated in this area, and just not a great experience. However, Sachem centralized 55, 56. In 56, 57, I came to Sachem, and we were housed in the Gatelot Avenue School. And at that time, we had only a 9th and 10th grade population. No high school. Well, that was the high school, but we had no high school building, which is now the Samoset building. So we entered that, I think, 56, 57, or 57, 58. We entered that. As a class of about 125 students. We were the second graduating class, so very small. We were about 100 when we started and about 125 after that. And a vastly different experience, I think, for every student, certainly for me. And formative is the word, because right away we're introduced to an amazing staff of people. Dick Berger was the principal, just loved kids. Boris Spivak was the assistant principal. But you're in touch with people like Don Woolley, Sam Cario, Pete Creedon, Vince Lombardi, of course, Coach Rothenberg, and a host of people who just were so centralized on kids, and who were themselves a small staff starting out on this new adventure, this new high school. So we were all in a position, in a starting position, and it sort of formed a bond, I think, among the staff. They were very, very much into students. And of course, the athletic program was the center of life for me and for a lot of other young men and women, especially with charismatic coaches like Don Woolley and Pete Creedon did the basketball, and Sam Cario, who was to this day a mentor and a man I have great respect for. And we do communicate. He and I communicate, and he's in Florida. We're here on Long Island. But it was vastly different in that way. So as a student, you could feel a connection to these people and to this organization. I became class president. I guess I was class president for all 4 years. A vastly different kind of connection to a school than I had prior to that, even in the city, with a large city school that I went to, and with the middle school in Port Jefferson. And what Sachem gave to students at that time was just, I think, life-changing. And certainly not just for myself, but for many, many others.
Yeah,
That
so
was the beginning.
Yeah, you 1960 graduate, and I have often wondered. I always hear, I mean, probably thousands of people went elsewhere because Sachem wasn't centralized yet. So as you mentioned, Port Jeff, Patchogue, Sayville, we had these 5, 6, 7 towns had no identity. And so to form that identity, to hear you say, we were excited to actually go to something that was in our own backyard. I've never thought of it like that, but I've often wondered and hoped that was the sentiment, because I feel like maybe there were some people that said, I really like going to Port Jeff. I missed out on some of my friends there. And then there's this new thing. That would have been a very small amount of people. But to hear your perspective of like, no, we actually have our own hometown. We have our new school that we could help form the identity with. It really, outside of when that may have happened again in 2004, when Sachem East launched, and it's a bit different because Sachem was still a thing at that point. It was a big thing. You guys, you and girls, your class, that 5960, just, probably wide-eyed going, wow, look, beautiful buildings, young and hungry teachers that are trying to leave their mark, coaches that are trying to build programs, Sam Carey, everybody that you're saying, everything that you experienced, very specific to that time. And I'm sure your classmates feel the same way.
Oh, I'm still in touch with a good number of them, and we do have reunions, and I can guarantee you that they feel that way. And I can still remember the experience of being at Gate Lot, looking out the window in some of the classes that faced toward the new high school as it was being built. And it was exciting just to see that happening. And then to finally be in it and have our own high school, beautiful at the time, just modern and new. And we all went over together. And yeah, we had the sense of being a part of something that was not only new, but was going to be special. And even in the times when we'd go to other schools to play, whether to wrestle or to play soccer or whatever it was, they couldn't even pronounce the name Sachem. But I think a lot about the Mount Rushmore people of Sachem, Walter Dunham, all of those people in the beginning. Herman Beebe, who was the first, I guess, board president. I created or did my entire career on one simple phrase that he held the rest of the board to, and that was, if it's good for kids, we do it, and if it's not, we don't. Doesn't have to get any more complicated than that. And as I moved through and became a teacher at Sachem, those words always were with me. And I think others of us who came back to Sachem to teach.
Obviously, these people made an impact on your life. At what point, as a student, did you say, I want to be a teacher, I want to be in Sachem? And when did that sort of light bulb go off for you?
Yeah, that was, I guess, in my late junior year. And actually, my father took me aside, and he's one of those hardworking guys, travel back and forth to the city. I didn't get to see him a lot, So those coaches meant even more to me. I mean, he was always, involved, but we didn't get to see him. But he took me aside one afternoon. He said, do you ever think about becoming a teacher? And I think that some of um, our coaches had spoken with my mom and dad about, maybe you want to talk to John about that, and then we'll follow up on that. I think that's how that happened. And then a dear friend of mine, Tom Sabatel, whom you know well, of course, and who made many important contributions to Sachem. He and I decided we'd like to go to Ithaca College, where Don Woolley went. We applied and we went to Ithaca College together. So after that late junior year, it became a thing that we were going to do, and we applied, and that's what happened.
And talk about that Mount Rushmore, and I always, almost every single conversation I've had, there's about 14 or 15 of these so far, I talk about Walter Dunham. I never got a chance to meet him, but I feel like this entire community should be in debt to him for his foresight, for his vision, the people he hired. Put aside what was built, put aside what it became, his staff and and I'm talking like not even just assistant superintendents, principals, teachers, whatever he did was profound because of what Sachem did become. And we were talking top academic spot, top athletic spot, the back page, the front page. We were the crown jewel of where you should move to. And I say we're because, listen, it's a different community now. We're trying to find ourselves again. What is our identity now? How do we get back to something like that? And I'm not afraid to say that because I did live through that. I experienced it, and I want my kids who are going to Sachem schools to feel that way too. I don't want to be average as a community. It's unacceptable to me. And anybody that would disagree with me, it doesn't have the kids' best interest, doesn't have the community, doesn't have 60,000 alumni's best interest. And so Walter Dunham, all those years ago, whatever he built was really special. And so what was your interaction with him? And by the way, you're a product of the people he hired, and you did a great job for, over 3 decades because you loved it, you lived it, and he was part of that.
Oh, he was more than part of it. He was it. He's the George Washington of that school district. I don't know where that vision comes from, where he could see, I think, Sachem going from its infancy, and he could gather the people, the Hugelmeyers, the Herman Beebes, those important people who were at the beginning of it, to carry out those ideas, to even buy enough land at that time to grow into what Sachem became the largest suburban school district, I think, in the country, but certainly the largest school district in New York State, with about, at one point, I think 21,000 students, certainly 20,000 students. Enormous. And people came here because of the school district. Everybody wanted the very best school district they could find for their kids. And he had that vision. Where does that come from? I don't know. To be able to see that, he didn't just take a job as superintendent. He invented that, and he grew it. He was a great man, and yes, we all owe him a debt. There's no question about that.
Sam Cario, I did actually have the fortune of speaking to just a month or two ago. Great conversation. He's got all his wits about him. I was really happy to talk to him about wrestling so deeply. I knew he was obviously very early on in Sachem's wrestling program important, but even before he ever got to Sachem, he had a great career. He wrestled at Memphis with Sprague Gardner and all this like amazing Long Island history, which has nothing to do with Sachem, but he brought that lineage here. You talk about sports. What were your profound memories as an athlete? Were there moments with coaches that you'll never forget? Were there specific plays? Talk about some of your sports experiences.
Yeah, we were a small group, so we got to be on first teams a lot. And, soccer. Don Woolley was the soccer coach, and of course became a great coach. But he was intense about playing, winning, playing hard, and you could not play for Don Woolley and not pick that up. So the spirit of intense competition certainly came from Don Woolley. He is, he just left a place in our hearts, no question. If you played for Don Woolley, then you had that intense competitive spirit. Sam Cario also was intense and competitive, but a very different style. He would not yell instructions from the bench when you were out on the mat. He expected all of us to be gentlemen on and off the mat, and you couldn't be in Sam's presence without understanding that and without becoming committed to that. Bob McNeil was our first track and field coach, and he just loved track and field, and again, that spirit of competitiveness, but be a gentleman and do it right. The ladies coaches, I think, had the same attitude toward being on a team. We're representing a brand new high school. We need to set the tone. When you go to other school districts, you need to carry the name of Sachem with you and be proud of it and be a good sports person. And that came away from all of the athletics. We were small, so we were always trying to climb the ladder in league competition, and look at where we went. Then, of course, were our great athletic heroes, Richie Van Oor, Red. I think that award is still one of the coveted, if not the most coveted, award that students can win. And to know him, we were wrestling partners, Richie and I, and we were on the soccer team. He was the halfback, center half. I was the right half. To feel that spirit of competition that he had. Of course, he was a great baseball player, and I think was sought after even in his early years. But that was kind of a very sad day in November when that terrible car crash happened, and it changed everyone. I believe the school set up buses for us to go to the funeral home. You could not come away from that without having been changed and touched in a way. The entire school was bused there, and it was dramatic. So that spirit, as well, among the athletes, lives on in Sachem. I think it certainly affected all of us. We carried it and still carry it. In addition to the coaches that gave us that competitive spirit.
For those who are unaware, Richie Van Noor died in a car crash. He was a multi-sport athlete. The Richard Van Noor Award is presented to the top male athlete in Sachem every year. The Linda Otten Award is presented to the top female athlete as well. There's a hard turn on Ronkonkoma Avenue right near Rainier Park, and Richie died on that turn. And I've written extensively about it. I visited his grave. I try to write about the Van Noor winner every year. Even on some of these Facebook groups, these Sachem High School friends, Sachem alumni, his name still comes up, mainly from your classmates who are obviously friends with him.
Yes.
And so I think it's important. That's a piece of our legacy. That's a piece of our history. It's a shame that someone's death rallies people, but he meant a lot to so many people. And you're right. He was scouted by pro baseball teams. He was the top soccer player. He was the top, it's just so many sports. Excuse me. And he's just a big figure before we had any big figures in sports. And so he was our guy. And unfortunately, he died too soon. Yeah. Another big sports name.
November 15th, 1958.
1958, yeah. Yeah, so what was that? You guys were sophomores?
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's so young. I mean, do you recall Were other people in the car? Did they get hurt as well? Anything like
Yes,
that?
there were 4 people, I believe, in the car, and they got hurt. Not. I mean, it's just. I do remember them.
Yeah,
Yes.
yeah, it's sad. So another big name from that era with sports and alive and well and kicking and friends of all of ours, Tom Sabatel is, one of those guys that also spent a lifetime in Sachem as a coach, as an athletic director, and he was an athlete on several of the teams that you're talking about. Talk about him. I've done one of these conversations with him. I'm friends with him. He's a good man.
Tom and I are dear friends. Tom and Paul Albert were the first recipients of the Van Orr Award. But Tom and I, we just share a lot of cultural history coming out of the city and, our backgrounds. So we became fast friends. We went to college together, were roommates in college and fraternity brothers in college. Not all 4 years, but we were fraternity brothers together all 4 years. And we came back to Sachem to give back. There was sort of an unwritten understanding that Tom would have an important position in athletics. I was a wrestling coach with Sam Carrio, and it was sort of foregone in our minds that some of that would happen, and it did with Tom. And of course, you can say so much about his having taken the reins from Dave Rothenberg, who mentored him through. Tom took that position as athletic director, physical education athletic director, and grew the athletic program to the extent that Sachem became the most powerful athletic school district on the island. I think most people would agree with that. Many professional sports figures come out of Sachem who were either directly taught by Tom or by coaches that Tom selected for a very particular reason. And so Jumbo Elliott and just so many. So Tom left an imprint on that school district, on the athletic program, especially, that I think is up there with the greats of Sachem.
So talk to me about coming back to teach. What was that experience like? Who were you interviewing with? When you got the job, were you elated? Did you think, wow, I'm gonna be in this community for the next 30 years too? Did it all play out like you expected?
Yeah. Well, it was quite an experience. I worked summers. Sachem was good enough to hire me in the summers as a groundsman and custodian. On the rainy days, we would be in the school buildings, and other days we would be cutting grass. And the home office was on the grounds where Winona is now, and that's where Walter Dunham drove his Studebaker, his blue Studebaker, in every day, and he would go to work there. And George Martinson, who was the business official, and all of the others. So I saw Walter Dunham just about every day, every work day. And at one point, I think maybe my third year there, I was unloading a truck, and so dressed in work clothes, and he came by, and we had a little conversation. He asked me to move his car for him, and the idea of working at Sachem came up. And I said, gee, I think I probably should have a suit on for this conversation. He said, I'd hire you. He had a plan. He knew who he wanted, in that school district. So I saw him a lot and came back to teach. Actually started in the elementary school at Gatelet Avenue School, which was surrealistic because that's where we started our careers. I was there, I think, for 3 or 4 years, and then the district was growing just exponentially. And so they would move a few of us who had a little bit of experience to new schools. And between working in all of the schools that existed in the summers and then moving through the school districts as the school district grew in the elementary schools and then in middle school and then of course in the high school was, I think, an incredibly formative and lucky experience for me because I moved with the students. And as a phys ed teacher, you see all of the kids. It was just one phys ed teacher in the school at the time. I think we had about 850 kids at Gate Lot, and the schools were very big. And I moved through the elementary schools with those kids, and then into the middle school with those kids, and then into the high school with most of those kids. So when that class graduated, I knew probably 80% of them by name. And that experience of seeing kids grow at different through their career stayed with me as an administrator. When I went into administration and became an assistant principal at the high school, I knew most of the kids, which was just so helpful in understanding the job and understanding kids. It was a sociological journey through the learning process about education and about kids for me. So from there, I went to the high school. I worked at the high school as an assistant principal. I worked at the junior high school for a while as an assistant principal. And then a job opened up at Chippewa, which was on the grounds of the first central office, where I cut grass and did all of that. So it was just all, connected and serialistic. There was so much to draw on in terms of the history, not reading about it, but being part of it. And so I had an understanding of Sachem and a love of that school district and an appreciation for what it did for me and other students that I think it's always been special to me. So yeah, and working through at the high school, we had 2 grades, 9 and 10, and then it was 10 and 11. It was separated at that time, 2 different buildings. And we had many students. We were on overlap sessions. It was very difficult for everyone, I think, to work in that environment. Later on, there was, of course, another high school east, but in those early days, it was crowded. It was something happening every moment, from student protests to wonderful, wonderful events. They called it, I think, a learning expo, wonderful events that we had. So we saw it all, I think, or saw most of it anyway.
I know I'm pretty sure one of the last years, maybe you were an interim, but when I was at Waverly as a kid, you were the principal there for a year or something, I recall.
I finished my career at Waverly.
Yeah.
I started it at Chippewa and then went to Waverly. And I was at Chippewa, I think, for 10 years or something. And then was at Waverly for the last 2 years. That, too, was a great experience. Wonderful staff. Many people that I knew, Morty Levine and so forth, that I knew even as a student. And really a gifted staff, hardworking, and a community of people that stayed. Many of the parents that I worked with were people who lived in that area when I was in high school. So, it was a lot of those understandings and relationships were renewed.
And so we're about the half hour mark. I mean, how do you sum up 30 plus years in your hometown, having left a legacy, having enjoyed it, having helped build what it became? How do you sum that up in, a
Yeah.
sentence?
Yeah. Great appreciation for having the good fortune to be in that school district at that time. I feel very fortunate about having learned the things that I did, mostly having been exposed to and taught by the people that we were. So I have great appreciation for that time period. I have very deep appreciation for the leaders of the district, the Dunhams, the Burgers, those folks, the Rudy DeSantolos, and all of those folks. So after retirement, I was offered a very nice position as the deputy executive director for the School Administrators Association of New York State, which represents now about 14,000 administrators. So I got to visit about 600 of the 800 school districts in New York State, and could compare what happened at Sachem to what happened, in all of those districts. And it only increased my appreciation for Sachem, and having the good fortune to be with leaders like we had at Sachem. So appreciation. And what Herman Beebe originally said, if it's good for students, we do it. And if it's not, we don't. So those kinds of thoughts have carried me through. And it's what I think about Sachem.
I love it. I really appreciate your perspective. I on behalf of our alumni base and the thousands of people you impacted, thank you for your contributions to our community. If it's good for kids, let's keep doing it. And if it's not, it's not. It doesn't really matter. And I think that's wise words to live by all these years later.
Chris, let me thank you again for doing the work that you do and keeping this alive and bringing it forward to others to learn from. It's great work. Thanks.
My pleasure. I appreciate it. And we'll talk soon.
Okay.